Hi, I'm Chloe. 3 days into what should have been the most romantic week of my life, my mother called me sobbing, begging me to come home because their house was falling apart and only I could fix it. My new husband Tyler looked at me across our hotel balcony, overlooking the crystal blue waters of Santorini, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. I should have listened to him when he said hang up the phone. Instead, I booked us tickets home, cutting our honeymoon short by 4 days. That decision cost me more than just a vacation. It cost me my marriage, my savings, and nearly my sanity. But it also taught me something my parents never intended for me to learn. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones working hardest to keep you small. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Patricia Martinez called, Tyler and I had just finished breakfast on the terrace of our boutique hotel. We were planning to spend the day exploring the volcanic beaches, maybe take that sunset cruise we'd been talking about since we landed. The Greek sun was warm on my shoulders, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely relaxed. Wedding planning had consumed the last year of our lives, and this trip was supposed to be our reward. Our chance to finally breathe. My phone rang at exactly 9:30 in the morning, which meant it was midnight back in Portland. My stomach dropped immediately. Nobody calls at midnight with good news. Patricia's voice was shaky, punctuated by the kind of dramatic sobs that had trained me to drop everything since I was 12 years old. Chloe, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have an emergency. The upstairs toilet is flooding, and your father tried to fix it, but now water is everywhere. It's dripping through the ceiling into the living room, and I don't know what to do. Vanessa is at that work conference in Seattle, and you know how helpless your father gets with these things. Could you maybe walk me through fixing it over the phone? Tyler watched my face change as I listened. He'd witnessed enough of my family's emergencies over the 2 years we'd been together to recognize the pattern. His jaw tightened and he shook his head slowly, mouthing the word no while pointing at the beautiful view behind us. Mom, I'm in Greece. I can't exactly troubleshoot plumbing from here. Can't you call a plumber? Or maybe ask the neighbors for help. A plumber on a Sunday night? Do you know how much that would cost? And the neighbors barely know us. Besides, you're so good at figuring these things out. Remember when you fixed the garbage disposal last Christmas? And that time you painted the whole guest bathroom because we couldn't afford contractor. The guilt settled in my chest like a familiar weight. I did remember those times. I remembered a lot of times, when I'd been the family's unpaid maintenance crew. The reliable daughter who could solve problems without costing them money. Even as a teenager, I'd been the one researching how to fix leaky faucets on YouTube, spending my weekends spackling holes in walls and re-caulking bathtubs. Chloe, Tyler said quietly, reaching across the small table to touch my hand. Tell her you'll help her find an emergency plumber and you'll call her back later. But Patricia was escalating, her voice climbing higher with each word. The water is spreading so fast. I can hear it dripping in the walls now. What if there's permanent damage? What if the whole ceiling caves in? We can't afford repairs like that. You know money's been tight since your father's hours got cut back. My chest tightened. Robert had been working reduced hours at the shipping company for almost 6 months now, something Patricia reminded me of every time she needed a favor. The implied message was always clear: they were struggling, and I was thriving with my marketing job and my new husband's steady income. The least I could do was help. Let me see what flights are available, I heard myself saying, even as Tyler's hand gripped mine tighter. Oh. You're such a good daughter. I knew you'd understand. Family has to stick together. Especially in emergencies. After I hung up, Tyler and I sat in silence for several minutes. The sounds of the Greek morning continued around us. Birds chirping, distant conversations in language we didn't understand. The gentle hum of scooters navigating the narrow streets below. It felt surreal to be surrounded by such beauty while my stomach churned with familiar anxiety. Chloe, Tyler said finally, his voice carefully controlled. We've been planning this trip for over a year. We saved for months. This is our honeymoon. I know, but it's an emergency. Water damage can be really serious if you don't address it quickly. Then they need to call a professional. You're not a plumber, you're not even in the same time zone. But if I can help them figure it out, maybe they won't need to spend money they don't have. Tyler's expression shifted from frustrated to something deeper, more concerned. Baby, listen to yourself. You're willing to abandon our honeymoon to troubleshoot your parents' plumbing from across the ocean. Doesn't that seem a little extreme to you? I wanted to argue, but something in his tone made me pause. Tyler wasn't usually dramatic about family stuff. He'd been patient with my parents' frequent requests for help. Their tendency to call during our date nights, their assumption that I'd be available whenever they needed something. But his patience had been wearing thin lately, and I was starting to understand why. What if it really is as bad as she says? What if their ceiling actually caves in? Then they call their insurance company and a contractor, like any other adult would do. Chloe, your mom has a smartphone, she can Google emergency plumbers just as easily as you can. But even as he spoke, I was already opening my laptop, searching for flights from Athens to Portland. The guilt was too strong, too familiar. I'd been trained since childhood to be the family's problem solver, the responsible one who dropped everything when duty called. Patricia had perfected the art of making her problems sound urgent, desperate, and somehow solvable, only by me. The earliest flight I could find left that evening, with a connection through Amsterdam. It would get us back to Portland by Tuesday afternoon, cutting our honeymoon from 7 days to 3. Tyler watched me book the tickets in real time, his face growing more distant with each click. You're really doing this? He said. It wasn't a question. It's just a few days. We'll come back to Greece sometime, maybe for our first anniversary. That's not the point, and you know it. I looked up from my laptop screen, finally meeting his eyes. Then what is the point? The point is that you're 26 years old and you still can't tell your mother no. The point is that we're supposed to be starting our life together, but you're still living like you're her personal handyman. The point is that this won't be the last emergency, Chloe. There's always going to be some. His words hit harder than I expected because somewhere deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't the first time my parents had interrupted our plans. Our engagement dinner had been cut short when Patricia needed help organizing Robert's surprise birthday party. Tyler had spent our 6-month anniversary helping my father move furniture because his back was acting up again. Even our wedding had been delayed by 2 months because Patricia insisted she needed more time to plan, though Tyler and I had offered multiple times to elope. They're my parents, I said, the words sounding weak even to me, and I'm your husband. As of 6 days ago, I'm supposed to be your priority, but I'm starting to feel like I'm married into a family where I'll always come second. I wanted to reassure him, to promise that wasn't true, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself making excuses, explaining why this situation was different, why my parents really did need me. Tyler listened quietly, but I could see him pulling away emotionally, building walls I wasn't sure I'd be able to climb later. We spent the rest of the morning packing in relative silence. Tyler helped, but his movements were mechanical, resigned. When I tried to touch his hand while we waited for our taxi to the airport, he didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. The easy intimacy we'd been building over our first few days of marriage felt suddenly fragile, like something that could shatter if handled wrong. The flight home was brutal. 16 hours of travel during which Tyler slept or stared out the window while I oscillated between guilt about cutting our honeymoon short and anxiety about what we'd find when we got to Portland. Patricia had sent 3 more dramatic text updates during our layover in Amsterdam, each one painting an increasingly dire picture of their home situation. Water still spreading. Can see stains on living room ceiling now. Dad tried to put buckets out, but it's too much. Thank God you're coming home. Ceiling starting to sag in one corner. Might need to call emergency services if it gets worse. Hope your flight is on time. Can't sleep, too worried about structural damage. This could cost us everything. You're a lifesaver, honey. By the time we landed in Portland Tuesday afternoon, I was convinced we'd find my childhood home underwater. My parents standing in the ruins of their life. Tyler, who had read the messages over my shoulder, remained skeptical. If it was really that bad, they would have called professionals by now. he said as we retrieved our luggage. Nobody sits in a flooding house for 3 days waiting for their daughter to fly home from Greece. But I was already focused on getting to Beaverton as quickly as possible. We grabbed a cab instead of waiting for Tyler's brother to pick us up as planned, and I spent the 30-minute drive imagining the worst-case scenarios. What if the damage was so extensive that my parents would have to move out? What if they couldn't afford repairs and expected Tyler and me to help financially? We just spent most of our savings on the wedding and honeymoon. When we pulled up to my parents' house, everything looked normal from the outside. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds weeded, the driveway clear of any emergency vehicles, no signs of the catastrophic flooding Patricia had described in her increasingly frantic messages. Tyler paid the cab driver while I ran to the front door, my key already in my hand. I burst through the entrance, calling out for my parents, expecting to find chaos, destruction, evidence of the emergency that had dragged us home from our honeymoon. Instead, I found Patricia in the kitchen, calmly preparing what looked like a roast for dinner. The house smelled like garlic and herbs, not the musty dampness I'd been expecting. She looked up from her cutting board with a bright smile, as if my arrival was a pleasant surprise, rather than the result of 3 days of emergency phone calls. "Oh good, you're here. How was your flight?" "I was just starting dinner." "Tyler, honey, you look tired." "Long trip." I stood in the doorway, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline of imagined disaster, taking in the scene. Everything looked perfectly normal, clean, organized, peaceful. No buckets catching dripping water, no water-stained ceilings, no signs of any emergency whatsoever. "Mom," I said slowly, "where's the flooding?" "Oh that. Your father figured it out Monday morning. Turns out it was just a loose connection behind the toilet. He tightened a few bolts, and it stopped completely. No damage at all, thank goodness." Tyler appeared behind me, setting down our suitcases with more force than necessary. "So there's no emergency?" Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Well, there was. It seemed really serious at the time, but you know how these things go. Sometimes problems sound worse in the middle of the night." "You called us last night," I pointed out, "and this morning, and yesterday. You said the ceiling was sagging." "Was it?" I might have been a little dramatic. "I was just so worried, and you know how your father gets with home repair. He's much better at following your instructions than figuring things out himself." Tyler's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "So we cut our honeymoon short for a loose bolt that Robert fixed himself." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds silly," Patricia said with a nervous laugh, "but we're so glad you're here, and since you came all this way, maybe you could help us with a few other projects while you're in town. The guest bathroom could really use a deep cleaning, and we've been meaning to organize the garage." Vanessa was supposed to help, but you know how busy she's been with work. I felt the ground shifting beneath me, the familiar sensation of being pulled into my family's gravitational field. This was how it always happened. A crisis that required my immediate attention, followed by a series of additional requests that somehow became my responsibility. Before I knew it, I'd be spending days doing unpaid labor while my own life got put on hold. "Actually," Tyler said, his voice deadly calm, "we're going to get a hotel and salvage what's left of our honeymoon here in Portland. Maybe visit some of the places we didn't get to see before we left for Greece." Patricia's face fell. "A hotel? But why? Your room is all ready for you." I put fresh sheets on the bed, and everything. It would be such a waste of money. "Unlike the money we wasted on unused hotel nights in Santorini," Tyler replied. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I could feel my mother's disappointment like a physical weight, but for the first time, I was also acutely aware of my husband's anger. Tyler rarely got confrontational, but when he did, it meant something important had been crossed. "Maybe we should stay," I said quietly, "just for tonight. We're both exhausted." Tyler looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something die in his eyes. Not love, exactly, but hope. The hope that I might choose differently, that marriage might have changed my default settings when it came to family obligations. "Fine," he said. "One night." Patricia brightened immediately. "Wonderful. Robert will be so excited to see you both." He's at the hardware store picking up supplies for the bathroom project. And just like that, I realized I'd been played. There had never been a real emergency. There had been a minor plumbing issue that Robert resolved himself, but Patricia had weaponized it, turning a simple fix into a crisis that required my immediate presence. And now that she had me here, the real agenda was emerging. They wanted free labor, and they'd used my guilt and sense of obligation to get it. Tyler excused himself to make some phone calls, but I knew he was really just escaping the house before he said something he couldn't take back. I stood in the kitchen with my mother, who was already pulling out cleaning supplies and making lists of tasks that needed to be completed. "You know," she said, her voice taking on that familiar tone of gentle manipulation, "since you're here anyway, it really would be helpful if you could tackle some of these projects." Vanessa promised she'd help, but she's always so busy with her career. "And you've always been so good at this kind of thing." I watched her pull out rubber gloves, scrub brushes, organizing bins, the same supplies I'd been handed countless times throughout my childhood and teenage years. The same expectation that I'd cheerfully donate my time and energy to maintaining their household while receiving nothing in return, except guilt if I resisted. "Mom," I said carefully, "Tyler and I just got married. This was supposed to be our honeymoon." "I know, sweetheart, but marriages require sacrifice, compromise. Tyler seems like a reasonable man. I'm sure he understands that family comes first." But as I looked toward the living room where my husband was pacing while talking on his phone, his body language radiating frustration and hurt, I wasn't sure he understood that at all. I wasn't sure I wanted him to. That evening, Robert returned from the hardware store with enough cleaning supplies to tackle a small office building. He greeted Tyler and me with his usual awkward enthusiasm, slapping Tyler on the back and asking about Greece in that overly jovial way that meant he was trying to smooth over an uncomfortable situation. Patricia had clearly briefed him on the day's events, and he was working overtime to make everything seem normal. "Hope you don't mind helping out with a few little projects while you're here," he said, unpacking bottles of tile cleaner and scrub brush. "Patricia's been after me to deep clean that guest bathroom for months, but you know how my back gets, and Chloe's always been our little problem solver." Tyler's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eye. "Actually, we were planning to explore Portland tomorrow, maybe check out some of the food trucks downtown, visit the Japanese garden." "Oh, there's plenty of time for that," Patricia interjected, appearing with a detailed list written on her favorite yellow legal pad. "These projects won't take long with an extra set of hands. Chloe's so efficient with this kind of thing." I found myself looking at the list despite every instinct telling me to walk away. Guest bathroom deep clean, organize garage storage, clean out basement storage room, touch up paint in hallway, reorganize kitchen pantry. Each item was written in Patricia's careful handwriting, with little checkboxes that seemed to mock me. These weren't emergency repairs. They were spring cleaning projects that had been accumulating for months. "Mom, this looks like a week's worth of work." "Oh no, honey, maybe 2 days if you really focus. You've always been so much faster at these things than the rest of us." Tyler set down his coffee mug with deliberate precision. "Chloe, could I talk to you outside for a minute?" We walked out to the small patio behind the house, where Patricia's herb garden was starting to show signs of early spring growth. Tyler leaned against the railing, looking out at the neighbor's fence rather than at me. "I need you to hear something," he said quietly, "and I need you to really listen, not just wait for your turn to explain or defend them." I nodded, though my chest was already tightening with defensive anxiety. "Your parents didn't have an emergency. They had a minor plumbing issue that your father resolved himself within 24 hours. But instead of calling a plumber or handling it themselves, they decided to manipulate you into cutting our honeymoon short, so you could come home and be their unpaid cleaning service. That's not what happened. They were genuinely worried about water damage, and His voice was gentle but firm. "Stop. Listen to what you just said. You're making excuses for people who lied to you." The word lied hit me like cold water. I wanted to argue to explain that Patricia had been scared, that she'd exaggerated out of panic, not malice. But as I replayed the phone calls in my mind, I couldn't escape the calculated nature of her distress, the way she'd escalated the urgency with each message, painting increasingly dramatic pictures of destruction and disaster. Even if that's true, I said slowly, they're still my parents. They raised me, supported me. If they need help, I should. What did they support you with? Tyler's question caught me off guard. I'm genuinely asking, when you graduated college, who paid off your student loans? I worked 2 jobs, and when you needed a car after yours broke down senior year, who co-signed the loan? I saved up and bought it myself. But when you got your first apartment, who helped with the security deposit? I was quiet for a moment, understanding where he was going. I used my savings, and when you landed your first marketing job, and wanted to celebrate, who planned the dinner? I took them out to dinner to thank them for their support. Tyler nodded slowly. So you've been financially independent since you were 22. You've never asked them for money, you've never lived in their house since college, and you actively treat them to meals and gifts, but somehow, you owe them unlimited free labor because they raised you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's not that simple, isn't it? Chloe, when was the last time your parents helped you with something? Not showed up to something you planned, not accepted something you offered, but actually helped you when you needed it. I opened my mouth to answer, and realized I couldn't think of a single example. When I'd moved into my current apartment, Patricia had complained about her arthritis and Robert had claimed his back was acting up. When I'd been overwhelmed with wedding planning, they'd added to my stress by insisting on specific vendors and elaborate details. When I'd gotten food poisoning last winter and could barely get out of bed, I'd managed alone because I didn't want to bother them. They did raise me, I said weakly. They did. And that was their job as parents. But being grateful for your childhood doesn't mean you owe them your adulthood. We stood in silence for several minutes, listening to the sounds of our neighbors living their lives. A dog barking, children playing, someone starting a lawnmower. Normal sounds of normal families who probably didn't manipulate each other across international time zones. What are you saying I should do? I asked finally. I'm saying we should go to a hotel tonight, enjoy the rest of our time in Portland, and fly back to Greece if we can change our tickets. I'm saying you should tell your parents that you came home for an emergency, not to be their cleaning service, and if they get upset, then they get upset. Chloe, you can't live your life trying to manage other people's emotions, especially people who don't seem particularly concerned about managing yours. I wanted to argue, but a memory surfaced unbidden. I was 16, and I'd spent an entire Saturday helping Patricia organize her closet, sort through old clothes, and rearrange furniture. When I'd finished, exhausted and covered in dust, she'd looked at the results and said, I guess it's better, but I thought you'd be more creative with the layout. Vanessa probably would have done something more interesting. The memory was followed by another. I was 22, painting their guest room while home for Christmas break. I'd missed a party with my college friends to help them, and when I'd expressed mild disappointment, Patricia had sighed and said, well, if spending time with family feels like such a burden, maybe you shouldn't bother coming home for holidays. You're right, I said suddenly, the words surprising me as much as Tyler. You're absolutely right. His shoulders relaxed slightly. So what do you want to do? I want to go inside, tell my parents that we're going to a hotel, and that they need to handle their own household projects like the adults they are. Tyler smiled for the first time since we'd left Greece. I love you. I love you too, and I'm sorry I chose their manipulation over our honeymoon. I'm sorry, I didn't see what you've been seeing. We walked back inside together, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but clarity, a sudden understanding of how many years I'd spent being available for other people's convenience, while putting my own needs last. Patricia was in the living room, spreading the cleaning supplies across the coffee table, like a general planning a military campaign. She looked up with bright expectation as we entered. Did you two have a nice chat? I was just organizing everything for tomorrow. I thought we could start with the bathroom since that's the biggest job. Then, actually, Mom, we're going to get a hotel tonight. Her face fell so dramatically that for a moment, I felt the familiar guilt creeping back. A hotel? But why? I made up your room specially, and we have so much to catch up on. We can catch up over dinner sometime this week, but Tyler and I are going to spend the rest of our time in Portland, actually honeymooning. But what about these projects? I was counting on your help. The word counting hit me wrong. Not asking, not hoping, but as if my labor was something she was entitled to, something she could budget and plan around without my consent. You'll need to hire someone or do them yourselves. Tyler and I are married now. Our time together is the priority. Patricia's expression cycled through several emotions: confusion, hurt, and finally settling on something that looked like anger. I see. Well, I suppose marriage changes people. I just hope you don't forget where you came from, Chloe. Family should come first. Family should support each other, I replied. Not manipulate each other into cutting honeymoons short for fake emergencies. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match, clearly uncertain how to navigate the sudden tension. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Fake emergency? That's a horrible thing to say. I was genuinely worried about a loose bolt that Dad fixed Monday morning. I didn't know it was just a loose bolt at the time, but you did know it was fixed when you continued asking me to come home for cleaning projects. Patricia's carefully maintained composure began to crack. I don't understand why you're being so hostile. I raised you to be helpful, to care about family. This selfishness isn't like you. No, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Being a doormat isn't like me, but it's what I've been trained to be. Tyler stepped closer to me, a subtle show of support that gave me strength to continue. Mom, I love you and Dad, but I'm not your unpaid maintenance crew anymore. If you need help with projects, you can hire professionals like everyone else does. Professionals cost money. Then maybe the projects aren't as urgent as you think they are. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, and I felt the familiar tug of guilt trying to pull me back into old patterns. But this time, I noticed something I'd missed before. The tears looked real, but there was something calculated about the timing, something performative about the way she let them fall just far enough to be visible without ruining her makeup. I guess I was wrong about the kind of person I raised, she said softly. I thought I raised someone who cared about family. You raised someone who cares so much about family that she flew home from Greece based on a phone call. But you also raised someone who's smart enough to recognize manipulation when she sees it. Robert finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. Maybe we're all a little tired, big emotions, long flights. Why don't we just... No, Dad, we're not going to smooth this over and pretend it didn't happen. I need you both to understand that things are going to be different going forward. Different how? Patricia's tears had dried remarkably quickly. Different, as in I won't be dropping everything every time you call with a crisis. Different, as in you'll need to ask, not assume, if you want my help with projects. Different, as in my marriage comes first. Well, Patricia said, her voice taking on a cold edge, I recognized from childhood arguments. I suppose we know where we stand now. You stand where you've always stood, as my parents, who I love, but not as people who get to control my schedule and manipulate my emotions. Tyler and I gathered our suitcases and called another cab. As we waited on the front porch, Patricia made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. You know, Vanessa would never treat us this way. She understands family loyalty. Vanessa lives in Seattle and visits twice a year, I pointed out. It's easy to be the good daughter when you're not available to be taken advantage of. The cab pulled up and Tyler loaded our bags while I stood looking at the house I'd grown up in. It looked smaller somehow, less significant. The flower beds I'd weeded, the shutters I'd painted, the walkway I'd pressure washed last summer, evidence of years of free labor given willingly because I'd been taught that love meant constant availability. Chloe, Patricia called from the doorway as we got into the cab. I hope you'll reconsider. Family is all we really have in this world. You're right, I said through the open car window. Family is important, that's why I'm protecting mine. As we drove away, Tyler reached over and took my hand. How do you feel? Terrified, I admitted. And is that weird? Not even a little bit, We checked into a boutique hotel in the Pearl District, a place we'd looked at for our wedding night, but decided was too expensive. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city, a deep soaking tub, and a king-sized bed that felt enormous after days of cramped airplane seats. That night, as we lay in the dark listening to the sounds of the city below, Tyler spoke softly into the darkness. I was starting to think I'd made a mistake. What do you mean? Not marrying you, but marrying into a family that would always come first. I was starting to think I'd signed up to be a supporting character in someone else's drama for the rest of my life. His words stung because they were accurate. I had been treating him like a supporting character, someone whose needs and feelings were secondary to my family's demands. I'm sorry, I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. The thing is, I don't think it was ever good. I think you've been managing their emotions and doing their work for so long that it seemed normal. But Chloe, healthy families don't operate like this. I thought about his family, the Brooks. When we visited them, Tyler's parents cooked for us, asked about our lives, and sent us home with leftovers and hugs. They'd insisted on contributing to our wedding costs even though we could afford it ourselves. When Tyler's sister had gotten divorced, the whole family had rallied around her, offering practical help and emotional support without keeping score. What if they're right though? What if I am being selfish? Tyler turned to face me in the dim light filtering through the hotel curtain. Chloe, you flew home from your honeymoon because your mother called crying about a plumbing problem. That's not selfish. That's the opposite of selfish. The problem isn't that you don't care enough about family. The problem is that they've trained you to care so much that you don't care about yourself. I felt tears starting, not the frustrated tears I'd been holding back for days, but something deeper. Grief, maybe, for the years I'd spent being available to people who took that availability for granted. I don't know how to set boundaries with them. Every time I try, they make me feel guilty. Guilt is just an emotion. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you're doing something different. We spent the next 3 days exploring Portland like tourists in my own city. We visited Powell's Books and spent hours wandering the stacks. We ate our way through food truck pods and took a wine tour in the Willamette Valley. We walked through the Japanese garden and the rose garden, talking about everything except my parents, but they weren't silent. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Patricia, each one perfectly calibrated to trigger maximum guilt. Just want you to know the bathroom project is taking much longer than expected. Dad's back is really bothering him. Vanessa called. She's disappointed that you weren't available to help while you were in town. Family occasions are important to her. I hope you're enjoying your hotel. Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around. Tyler watched me read each message, my shoulders tensing with every notification. You know you don't have to respond to those, right? But what if they actually need something? Then they'll call a professional or figure it out themselves, like they did with the toilet. On our last morning in Portland, my phone rang instead of buzzing with a text. It was Vanessa calling from Seattle. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Chloe, what the hell is going on? Mom called me crying, saying you abandoned them and refused to help with basic household maintenance. She said you were cruel to her, that marriage has changed you. I took a deep breath, looking out at the city skyline while Tyler packed our suitcases for our rescheduled flight back to Athens. Did she tell you about the emergency that brought us home from our honeymoon? Some plumbing issue? Yeah, she said you were a lifesaver. A plumbing issue that Dad fixed himself Monday morning, but somehow became my responsibility to solve from Greece, requiring us to cut our honeymoon short. There was silence on the other end of the line. Wait. What? The emergency was a loose bolt behind their toilet. Dad tightened it himself, but Mom had already convinced me to fly home, so then it became about cleaning their bathroom and organizing their garage. Oh, Vanessa's voice was small. Oh shit. Yeah, Chloe, I had no idea. When she called me, she made it sound like you just refused to help them with reasonable requests. When was the last time they asked you to spend your vacation time doing household projects? Another long pause. Never, but I always assumed that was because I lived too far away, or because you never established yourself as the family's go-to problem solver. Fuck, I'm sorry. I completely bought into her version of events. It was strange, hearing Vanessa apologize. We'd never been particularly close, partly because of the 6-year age gap, and partly because she'd always been the favored daughter, the one whose career was celebrated while mine was seen as a convenient source of free labor. It's okay, she's very convincing. No, it's not okay. I should have asked more questions. I should have realized there was another side to the story. After I hung up, Tyler looked at me with raised eyebrows. How did that go? Better than expected. I think Vanessa is starting to see the pattern too. Good. You need allies, not just people who enable your parents' behavior. We flew back to Athens that afternoon, and something about being in the air again, leaving Portland behind, felt like shedding old skin. Tyler fell asleep against my shoulder, and I stared out the window at the clouds below, thinking about the conversation with Vanessa. For years I'd assumed my sister simply didn't care about our parents the way I did. I'd resented her freedom, her ability to live her life without constant interruption from family crises. But now I wondered if she'd simply been smarter about boundaries from the beginning. Or maybe Patricia had never tried to manipulate her the same way, because Vanessa had never established herself as reliably available. When we landed in Athens, our hotel had kept our room available, and we still had 4 days of honeymoon left. But something fundamental had shifted during our 3 days in Portland. I felt different, lighter somehow, but also uncertain about what came next. Do you think they'll forgive me? I asked Tyler as we sat on our balcony that first night back, sharing a bottle of wine, and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Do you think you need their forgiveness for protecting your marriage? I don't know, maybe. They're still my parents. They are. And if they love you, they'll respect your boundaries eventually. If they don't respect your boundaries, then you'll know something important about the kind of love they're offering. That night, I turned off my phone for the first time in years. No emergency notifications, no guilt-inducing text messages, no middle-of-the-night crises that required my immediate attention. Just silence, and the sound of Tyler breathing beside me, and the distant hum of Athens, settling into sleep. I slept better that night than I had in months. The silence lasted exactly 4 days. I was sitting at a seaside cafe in Fira, responding to work emails, while Tyler explored a nearby art gallery, when my phone started buzzing with an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. Portland area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. Chloe? Thank God, it's Mrs. Henderson from next door to your parents. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Henderson was 83 years old, and had lived next to my family since I was in elementary school. She only called when something was seriously wrong. Mrs. Henderson, is everything okay? Well, I'm not sure, dear. Your mother asked me to call you. She said she's been trying to reach you but your phone isn't working. She's quite upset. I glanced at my phone screen, which showed 17 missed calls from Patricia, and 12 from Robert, all of which I'd deliberately ignored. My phone is working fine. What did she want you to tell me? She said there's been an accident. Your father fell off a ladder yesterday while trying to fix something on the roof. He's in the hospital. The words hit me like ice water. Whatever boundaries I'd been trying to establish suddenly felt insignificant compared to the possibility that Robert was seriously injured. Is he okay? What happened? I don't know all the details, dear. Your mother just asked me to tell you to call her right away. She seemed very distraught. I thanked Mrs. Henderson, and immediately called the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried Patricia's cell phone, my hands shaking as I dialed. Chloe? Oh, thank God you finally called. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Mrs. Henderson said Dad fell off a ladder. Is he okay? What hospital is he at? He's at OHSU. He was trying to clean the gutters because we couldn't afford to hire someone, and the ladder slipped. He hit his head and his shoulder pretty badly. My chest tightened with familiar guilt. If I had stayed and helped with their projects instead of running off to finish my honeymoon, Robert wouldn't have been on that ladder alone. How bad is it? They're still running tests. Possible concussion. Definitely some bruising, and maybe a sprained shoulder. But Chloe, he keeps asking for you. He's worried you're angry with us. I'm not angry, I know we had some words before you left, but this is bigger than that. This is family. Can you please come home? I found myself looking around the beautiful cafe, watching other tourists enjoy their vacations without family emergencies pulling them back to reality. Tyler had warned me this would happen. He'd said there would always be another crisis, another reason I was needed immediately. Mom, I'm in Greece. I can't just. I'll pay for your ticket. Both of your tickets. I know we asked a lot before, but this is different. This is real. The word real stung because it implied that their previous crisis hadn't been real, which was exactly what Tyler and I had concluded. But a man in the hospital was undeniably real, regardless of how he'd gotten there. Can I talk to Dad? He's sleeping right now, but the doctor said he might have to stay overnight for observation. Chloe, I'm scared. What if something worse had happened? What if I'd lost him because we were too proud to ask for help with simple home maintenance? The manipulation was so smooth I almost missed it. Patricia had taken Robert's accident and turned it into evidence that I should have stayed to help with their project. His injury was somehow my fault for not being available to clean gutters. Mom, Dad's accident happened because he chose to climb a ladder by himself, not because I wasn't there to do your household chores. That's a cruel thing to say. It's an accurate thing to say. Tyler appeared at my table, taking one look at my face and sitting down immediately. I put the call on speaker so he could hear. Your father is in the hospital, and you're worried about being accurate. What happened to compassion? What happened to family loyalty? What happened to hiring professionals for dangerous work instead of guilting your daughters into free labor? Patricia's voice shifted to the tone I remembered from childhood arguments. Cold and cutting. I see. Well, I suppose I know where I stand. My husband is injured, and my daughter is more concerned with proving a point than being here for her family. Tyler leaned forward and spoke directly into the phone. Patricia, this is Tyler. Is Robert in immediate danger? Tyler, well, no, not immediate danger. But is he current and coherent? Yes, but he's very upset that. Then this isn't an emergency that requires Chloe to fly home from her honeymoon. This is a hospital stay for observation after a minor accident. Minor. He could have been killed, but he wasn't. And Chloe being there won't change his medical care or his recovery time. I watched Tyler handle my mother with the same calm professionalism he used at work when dealing with difficult clients. No emotional manipulation could gain traction because he refused to engage with it on that level. I think Patricia said icily that Chloe should speak for herself. You're right, I said. Dad, if you can hear me, I love you, and I'm glad you're okay. But I'm not coming home early again. If you want to talk to me, you can call me directly instead of having Mom relay messages through the neighbors. Chloe Marie Martinez, I cannot believe the person you've become. The use of my full name was a deliberate callback to childhood, when Patricia would invoke my complete name before delivering punishment or guilt. But I was 26 years old, sitting in a Greek cafe with my husband, living my own life. The power that name once held had evaporated. I've become someone who doesn't abandon her honeymoon for home improvement projects disguised as emergencies. I hung up before she could respond. Tyler reached across the table and took my hand. How do you feel? Like I just kicked a pup. Because you refused to fly home for the second time in a week. Because my dad is hurt, and I'm not there. Your dad is getting medical care from trained professionals. You being there won't heal his concussion faster or make his shoulder less sore. But what if something else happened? What if there are complications? Tyler was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Chloe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. In your entire life, how many times have your parents had genuine emergencies that required your immediate presence? I started to answer quickly, then stopped. Real emergencies, not inconveniences, not projects they didn't want to handle themselves, not situations they'd created through poor planning or stubbornness. Actual emergencies where my presence was necessary rather than simply convenient. I can't think of any, I admitted finally. But how many times have they convinced you to drop everything and rush to their aid? Dozens, maybe hundreds, if you count all the smaller things. And how many of those times did your presence actually solve the problem, versus just providing free labor or emotional support they could have gotten elsewhere. I thought about all the weekends I'd spent painting, cleaning, organizing, and troubleshooting. All the dates with Tyler I'd canceled for family obligations. All the times I'd rearranged my schedule because Patricia needed help with something that wasn't actually urgent. None of them, I said quietly, none of those situations actually needed me specifically. Right, because your parents aren't helpless. They're capable adults who've learned to use your guilt and sense of obligation to get free services. But what if this time is different? What if Dad really does need me? Then he'll call you himself and ask. Not have your mother call the neighbor to call you with second-hand information designed to make you panic. Tyler was right, but admitting it felt like betraying something fundamental about my identity. I'd been the helpful daughter for so long that I didn't know who I was without that role. If I wasn't the one who dropped everything for family emergencies, who was I? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Chloe, this is Vanessa. Mom asked me to fly down from Seattle because Dad's in the hospital. When I got here, I found him sitting up in bed, eating Jell-O, and complaining that the TV channels are limited. He's fine. Mom said you refused to come home and she's telling everyone you've abandoned the family. Thought you should know what narrative she's spinning. I showed the message to Tyler, who raised his eyebrows. Your sister's becoming a useful ally. She's protecting herself too. If I'm not available to be the family problem solver, Vanessa becomes the backup option. Smart woman. I texted Vanessa back. Thanks for the reality check. How's Dad really doing? Her response came quickly. Mild concussion, bruised shoulder, ego, more damaged than anything else. He's embarrassed about falling and taking Mom's drama personally. Doctors want to keep him one more night for observation, but he'll be home tomorrow. Mom, however, is acting like he's dying and you're a heartless monster for not rushing to his bedside. Are you staying to help? Hell no. I told her I have to get back to Seattle for work. Unlike some people, I never established myself as the family's unpaid emergency response team. I almost laughed despite the situation. Vanessa had figured out years ago what I was just learning. The only way to avoid being manipulated was to never be available for manipulation in the first place. Over the next few hours, my phone continued buzzing with messages from various family friends and relatives, all delivering versions of the same message. Patricia was telling everyone that I'd abandoned my injured father to continue my selfish honeymoon in Europe. The story was evolving with each retelling, becoming more dramatic and painting me as increasingly heartless. According to Aunt Linda, I'd refused to come home even though Robert was on his deathbed. According to my cousin Michelle, I'd told Mom that my vacation was more important than family. According to Mrs. Patterson from church, I'd said horrible things to my grieving mother and hung up on her. None of these stories were accurate, but they all served the same purpose, positioning Patricia as the suffering matriarch, whose ungrateful daughter had abandoned the family in their time of need. She's building a case, I told Tyler as we walked along the Caldera path that evening, watching the sunset paint the white buildings of Oya in shades of gold and pink. She's making sure everyone knows her version of events before I get home. Why does that matter? Because now when people see me at the grocery store or church, they'll think I'm the daughter who abandoned her injured father for a vacation. The narrative is already set. And you care what those people think? I considered the question seriously. Did I care what Ms. Patterson thought about my family loyalty? Did it matter if Aunt Linda thought I was selfish? These were people who only got Patricia's carefully curated version of our family dynamics, who had no idea about the years of manipulation and the constant demands for free labor. I thought I did, I said finally, but maybe I don't actually care what people think when they don't know the whole story. What do you care about? I care about Dad being okay, which he is. I care about my marriage, which is stronger than it's been in months. I care about finishing our honeymoon and going home to build our life together. Then focus on those things. Let your mother tell whatever stories she wants to tell. The people who matter will figure out the truth eventually. That night, I called Robert direct. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired but alert. Chloe, sweetheart, you didn't need to call. I know you're on your honeymoon. Of course I needed to call. I heard you took a tumble. How are you feeling? Embarrassed, most stupid old man thinking he could clean gutters like he's still 30. Your mother's been beside herself, calling everyone we know. Dad, I'm sorry I wasn't there when it happened, but I'm glad you're okay. You're sorry, honey? Why would you be sorry? You're on your honeymoon in Greece, for crying out loud. I'd be disappointed if you were here worrying about my bruises instead of enjoying that beautiful country with your husband. His response was so different from Patricia's that for a moment I wondered if we were talking about the same incident. Mom seemed to think I should come home. Robert was quiet for a moment. Your mother worries. Sometimes that worry comes out as needing everyone close by, even when it's not practical. But Chloe, I'm fine, sore and embarrassed, but fine. Don't you dare cut your honeymoon short for this. Are you sure? In fact, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have said years ago. Your mother means well, but she's gotten used to having you solve every little problem that comes up. It's not fair to you, and it's not healthy for any of us. I felt tears starting, not from sadness, but from relief. Robert had seen the pattern too. I wasn't imagining the manipulation or being overly sensitive about reasonable requests for help. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go enjoy Greece, and stop worrying about us. We managed to survive 26 years before you were born. I think we can handle a few more weeks without you. After I hung up, Tyler pulled me into his arms on the hotel balcony. Feel better? Much better. Dad gets it. He sees what's been happening. Good. That means you're not crazy, and it means you might have an ally when you get home. What do you think will happen when we get back to Portland? I think your mother will double down on the guilt and manipulation because that's what she knows. I think she'll try to make you feel responsible for every problem your family faces from now on. And I think you'll have to decide whether you want to keep playing that game. I don't want to play that game anymore. Then don't. But Chloe, it's going to get harder before it gets easier. People don't give up control willingly, especially when they've had it for 26 years. Tyler was right. Over the next 3 days, while we explored ancient ruins and swam in volcanic hot springs, my phone buzzed constantly with increasingly dramatic updates from Patricia. The doctors were concerned about Robert's recovery. He wasn't eating well. He seemed depressed. The hospital bills were going to be expensive. The house projects still needed to be completed. And now Robert couldn't help. Each message was designed to pull me back into the orbit of family crisis, to make me feel guilty for enjoying my honeymoon while they suffered. But something had shifted during my conversation with Robert. His clear-eyed assessment of the situation had given me permission to trust my own judgment about what was reasonable and what was manipulation. Instead of responding to Patricia's messages, I sent one text directly to Robert each day. Thinking of you, hope you're feeling better, love you. He responded with photos of himself recovering at home, watching baseball, reading mystery novels, and generally looking like a man who was healing normally from a minor accident. No drama, no crisis, no need for emergency daughter intervention. On our last day in Santorini, Tyler and I sat on the beach talking about what we wanted our marriage to look like going forward. Not just the big picture dreams about kids and careers and where we might want to live someday, but the practical boundaries we'd need to establish to protect our relationship from outside interference. I think Tyler said, we need to institute a 24-hour rule for family emergency. What do you mean? I mean, unless someone is dying, or the house is actually on fire, we wait 24 hours before responding to crisis calls. Most of the time, the emergency will resolve itself, or the real situation will become clear. And if it's a genuine emergency, then waiting 24 hours won't matter, because you'll be dealing with hospitals and insurance companies, not family drama. It was a good rule, one that would protect us from the kind of manipulation that had already derailed our honeymoon. But I knew implementing it would require constant vigilance against my own conditioning. I'm scared, I admitted. What if I slip back into old patterns? What if the guilt becomes too much and I cave? Then we'll figure it out together. But Chloe, you've already proven you can stand up to them. You did it in their living room, and you did it on the phone from Greece. The hard part isn't knowing what to do. The hard part is doing it consistently. That evening, we had our last dinner on the island at a small restaurant perched on the cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea. The food was simple but perfect. fresh fish and vegetables and wine that tasted like sunshine. We talked about work and travel plans, and the apartment we were renting back in Portland. Normal couple conversations about a future we were building together. As we walked back to our hotel, I realized I felt different than I had at the beginning of our trip. Not just relaxed from vacation, but fundamentally shifted in some way that felt permanent. The constant low-level anxiety that had become my baseline was gone, replaced by something that felt like solid ground beneath my feet. "Thank you," I told Tyler as we packed our suitcases for the flight home. "For what?" "For seeing what I couldn't see, for not letting me settle for being a supporting character in my own life. You figured it out yourself. I just refused to enable the dysfunction." "Same thing, really." Tyler smiled and kissed my forehead. "Welcome to your real life, Mrs. Brooks." The flight home was different from our panicked departure a week earlier. This time we were returning because our honeymoon was actually over, not because we'd been manipulated into cutting it short. I felt nervous about facing Patricia and the aftermath of Robert's accident, but not the sick dread that used to accompany family obligations. When we landed in Portland, I turned my phone back on and found 37 unread messages. Most were from Patricia, but there were also texts from neighbors, relatives, and family friends, all expressing concern about Robert's condition and disappointment in my absence. I scrolled through them quickly, looking for any indication of genuine emergency or concerning developments in Robert's recovery. There were none, just increasingly elaborate descriptions of his emotional state, and Patricia's martyrdom in caring for him single-handedly. "Anything urgent?" Tyler asked as we retrieved our luggage. "Nope, just the usual guilt campaign." "Good, then we stick to the plan. Hotel tonight, apartment hunting this weekend, and dinner with your parents when your dad is feeling better. On our terms, not there." As we rode the hotel shuttle away from the airport, I watched the familiar landscape of Portland roll past the windows. Home, but different now. I was different now. Whatever happened next with my family, I was no longer willing to sacrifice my marriage, my time, or my peace of mind to manage their emotions and solve their problems. For the first time in my adult life, I was more curious than afraid about what would happen when I refused to play by their rules. The first sign that something had shifted came when we returned to our apartment to find the locks had been changed. Tyler and I stood in the hallway outside our door, key in hand, staring at the shiny new deadbolt that definitely hadn't been there when we left for Greece. My first instinct was panic. Had we been robbed? Had the landlord changed the locks for some reason? But then I noticed the small piece of paper taped to the doorframe, folded neatly and labeled Chloe in Patricia's distinctive handwriting. "I have a bad feeling about this," Tyler said as I unfolded the note. He was right to be concerned. The note was brief but loaded with implication. "Borrowed your spare key to water your plants while you were away. Noticed some security issues with your old locks, so we had them upgraded as a welcome home gift. New keys are with the building manager. Hope you had a wonderful time in Greece. Love, Mom and Dad." Tyler read over my shoulder and I felt his entire body tense. "They what now?" "They changed our locks, without asking, using your spare key, using my spare key." We stood there for a moment, processing the violation. Patricia and Robert had entered our home without permission, made significant changes to our security, and then presented it as a gift. The manipulation was so brazen it was almost impressive. "This is unhinged," Tyler said finally. "Normal people don't change other people's locks as a surprise." I knocked on the building manager's door, hoping Mrs. Chen would be available to explain what had happened. She answered quickly, clearly expecting us. "Oh, good, you're back. Your parents said you were returning today. They were so thoughtful to upgrade your security while you were away. Mrs. Chen, did they say why they felt our locks needed to be changed?" "Something about safety concerns. I think they mentioned break-ins in the neighborhood. Very responsible of them to take care of it for you. There hadn't been any break-ins in our neighborhood. I'd been getting the community safety emails for 2 years, and the last incident was a car prowl 6 months ago." Patricia had fabricated a security concern to justify entering our home and changing our locks. Mrs. Chen handed me a small envelope containing 2 new keys. They paid for the upgrade and the locksmith fee, said it was their wedding gift to you. Tyler thanked her politely, but I could see the muscle in his jaw jumping again. We climbed the stairs to our apartment in silence, and I used the new key to open the door that should have opened to my old key. Inside, everything looked exactly as we'd left it, with one notable exception. The plants Patricia had supposedly watered were bone dry, their leaves wilted and yellowing. The small succulent on the kitchen windowsill was completely desiccated. If watering plants had been her motivation for entering our apartment, she'd done a remarkably poor job of it. The plants are dead, I said, more to myself than to Tyler. The plants were never the point. He was right, the plants had been an excuse, a reasonable-sounding cover story for what was actually a power play. Patricia had wanted to demonstrate that she could access our private space whenever she chose, and changing the locks was her way of making that access official and permanent. Why would she do this? Tyler set down his suitcase and looked around our apartment with fresh eyes, as if checking for other signs of intrusion. Because you've been setting boundaries, and she's escalating to regain control. By changing our locks, by making sure you know that nowhere is truly private from her, she can enter your home, make changes to your security, and present it as a favor. It's a power move disguised as generosity. The more I thought about it, the more sinister it became. Patricia had used my spare key, which I'd given her years ago for genuine emergencies, to enter our apartment while we were out of the country. She'd hired a locksmith to change our locks without our knowledge or consent. She'd paid for the upgrade, creating a debt we never asked for and couldn't easily repay. And she'd done it all under the guise of caring about our safety. I called her immediately, too angry to follow Tyler's 24-hour rule. "Chloe, you're home. Did you get my note? I hope you don't mind. But we thought your old locks looked a little flimsy." "Mom, you entered my apartment without permission and changed my locks. I used the spare key you gave me. And we paid for everything ourselves. I thought you'd be grateful." "Why would I be grateful that you violated my privacy?" "Violated your privacy? Chloe, that's a very hurtful way to describe parents who care about their daughter's safety." The word hurtful was a familiar weapon in Patricia's arsenal. Whenever I objected to her behavior, she reframed my objection as an attack on her character. My legitimate concern about boundaries became me being hurtful to my loving mother. "You had no right to enter my home while I was away." "I had every right. You gave me that key for emergencies, and I was concerned about security in your neighborhood." "What security issues?" "There have been break-ins." "Where? When?" "I don't remember the specifics, but I heard from someone at church that the area has been having problems." "Someone at church? Not the police, not the news, not the community safety alerts I received monthly. Someone at church had mentioned vague security concerns, and Patricia had used that gossip to justify entering my apartment and changing my lock." "Mom, even if there were security issues, you should have called me first. You were in Greece. I wasn't going to bother you with home security concerns while you were on your honeymoon. But you did bother me while I was on my honeymoon. Multiple times. For Dad's accident, for cleaning projects, for various family emergencies." "That's different. Those were important. And my consent to changes in my living situation isn't important." Patricia's voice shifted to the cold tone I'd learned to dread. "I'm beginning to think marriage has changed you in ways I don't recognize. The Chloe I raised would appreciate parents who care enough to ensure her safety. The Chloe you raised would have accepted this violation without question. But that Chloe was a pushover, and I'm working on not being a pushover anymore." "A pushover? Is that how you see your family's love? As something to push you over?" The conversation was spiraling into familiar territory, where Patricia twisted my words and made me defend positions I'd never taken. I could feel myself getting pulled into the old dynamic, where I'd end up apologizing for being upset about her behavior. "Tyler and I are coming over tonight to return your spare key," I said instead. "Return it? But what if there's an emergency? Then you'll call us, and we'll decide whether to come over." That seems very cold, Chloe. That seems very normal, Mom. I hung up before she could respond, and immediately felt the familiar wash of guilt. Tyler watched me pace around our living room, working through the emotional aftermath of the conversation. How do you feel? He asked. Like I just told my mother I don't love her. What did you actually tell her? That she needs to return my spare key instead of using it to enter my apartment whenever she wants. Which is a completely reasonable boundary. So why do I feel like a monster? Tyler pulled me down onto the couch beside him. Because she's trained you to feel like a monster whenever you assert your needs. That's how manipulation works. It makes you feel guilty for having normal human boundaries. What if I'm overreacting? What if she really was just worried about security? Then why didn't she water the plants she claimed to be watering? I looked at the withered succulent on the windowsill, its leaves brown and crisp. Patricia had used plant care as her justification for entering our apartment. But she'd completely neglected the plants she was supposedly tending. She forgot. Or she never intended to water them in the first place. Chloe, people who break into houses to help with plant care don't usually forget to actually help with plant care. She didn't break in. She used the key I gave her. For emergencies. Was there an emergency? She thought there might be security issues, based on rumors from church. When you put it like that, it sounds crazy. It is crazy. Normal people don't change other people's locks based on unverified gossip. Normal people don't enter other people's homes without permission, and then present it as a gift. That evening, we drove to my parents' house in Beaverton. I'd called ahead to let them know we were coming, but Patricia had sounded surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to follow through on returning the spare key. Robert answered the door, looking much better than I'd expected. His color was good, he was moving without obvious pain, and he seemed genuinely happy to see us. Whatever injuries he'd sustained in his fall appeared to be healing well. "There's my girl," he said, pulling me into a careful hug. "Tyler, good to see you, son. How was the rest of your honeymoon?" "Beautiful," Tyler replied. "Sorry to hear about your accident. You're looking much better." "Old men shouldn't climb ladders without supervision," Robert said with a self-deprecating smile. Lesson learned. Patricia appeared behind him, her expression guarded. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come by tonight." I said I would. "You've said a lot of things lately that didn't turn out to be true." I chose not to take the bait. Instead, I pulled the spare key from my purse and held it out to her. "Thank you for being concerned about our security. But we won't be needing you to have access to our apartment anymore." Patricia stared at the key like it was a snake. "You're really going to take that back?" "I'm really going to establish appropriate boundaries with my adult living situation. What if there's an emergency? Then we'll handle it ourselves. Or we'll ask for help if we need it. What if you're out of town and something happens? Then we'll deal with it when we get back. Like other adults." Patricia's face was cycling through emotions, settling on something that looked like grief. "I don't understand what happened to you in Greece. You left here as my daughter, and you came back as a stranger. I came back as a married woman, who's learning to put her marriage first. And that means shutting out your family. It means having normal boundaries with my family." Robert stepped forward, taking the key from my hand. "Patricia, let them handle their own affairs. We managed our apartment just fine when we were their age. That was different. We didn't have parents who cared enough to help. We had parents who respected our independence." The comment seemed to hit Patricia like a physical blow. She looked between Robert and me as if we'd ganged up on her, which in a way we had. Robert's support for my boundary setting was clearly unexpected. "I see," she said quietly. "I guess I know where everyone stands now." "Mom, this isn't about taking sides, it's about me being an adult. Adults don't abandon their families when times get tough." I didn't abandon anyone. I finished my honeymoon after Dad's minor accident was resolved. And now I'm establishing reasonable boundaries about home access. Reasonable to who? Reasonable to me, and to Tyler. And apparently to Dad. Patricia looked at Robert with something that might have been betrayal. "You're supporting this?" "I'm supporting our daughter's right to live her own life without us hovering over every decision." "Hovering? Is that what you call caring?" Sometimes, yes. The conversation was deteriorating rapidly, and I could see Tyler getting ready to intervene. But something about Robert's unexpected support gave me courage to push through. Mom, I love you, but love doesn't give you the right to enter my home without permission, or make decisions about my living situation without consulting me. Everything I do is out of love, I know, but impact matters more than intention. The impact of you changing my locks was that I felt violated and controlled. You felt violated by parents who care about your safety. I felt violated by parents who made major changes to my home without my knowledge or consent. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, and I felt the familiar tug of guilt, but this time, I also noticed something else. The tears looked real, but they were accompanied by a quick glance at Robert to gauge his reaction. Even her emotional response was partially performative. I think, Tyler said quietly, we should probably head home. Thank you for upgrading our security. But in the future, please check with us before making any changes to our living situation. Patricia didn't respond, but Robert nodded. Of course, that's only fair. As we walked back to our car, I felt simultaneously relieved and heartbroken. Standing up to Patricia was getting easier, but it was also making the dysfunction in our family relationship more apparent. I was starting to understand that what I'd always interpreted as love and concern was often manipulation and control. Your dad's a good guy, Tyler said as we drove home. Yeah. I think he's been seeing what I'm seeing for a while now, but he's stayed quiet about it, probably to keep the peace. Robert's not a confrontational person, but he backed you up tonight. He did. I wasn't expecting that. When we got home, I spent some time researching locksmith services online. The company Patricia had hired was expensive, specializing in high-end security systems for commercial buildings. She'd paid nearly $300 to change our locks, money she'd claimed they didn't have when asking me to do household projects for free. She spent $300 to change our locks, I told Tyler, money they couldn't afford to spend on professional house cleaning. Exactly, so the financial hardship is selective. Very selective. That night, as we lay in bed in our apartment with its new locks, I realized I felt safer than I had in years, not because the locks were more secure, but because I'd finally started protecting myself from the people who claimed to love me most. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Mom called me crying about how you've changed and won't let her help with your security anymore. She wants me to talk some sense into you. I told her you sounded perfectly sensible to me. How are you holding up? I texted back. Better than expected. Dad's supporting the boundaries, which helps. Good for him. Mom's been calling everyone in the family to complain about your new attitude. Most people are staying out of it, but Aunt Linda is very concerned about your marriage changing. My marriage is the best thing that ever happened to me. I can tell. You sound stronger. I feel stronger. Good. Don't let her guilt you back into being her personal assistant. 3 days later, Patricia called with another emergency. The washing machine was making strange noises, and she was worried it might flood the laundry room. Could I come over and take a look before they called a repair service? Mom, I'm not a washing machine repair person, but you're so good at figuring out these mechanical problems. Remember when you fixed our dishwasher? I did remember. I'd spent an entire Saturday diagnosing a clogged drain that could have been fixed in 10 minutes with a simple drain cleaner from the hardware store. That was different. This sounds like you need a professional. Professionals are so expensive, and they always try to sell you things you don't need, then get a second opinion from another professional. Chloe, I just need you to take a quick look. It won't take long. Mom, I'm establishing a boundary here. I'm not going to be your go-to person for household repairs anymore. But family helps family. Family also respects family's time and expertise. You wouldn't ask me to perform surgery just because medical care is expensive. That's completely different. It's exactly the same. You're asking me to provide professional services for free instead of hiring the appropriate professionals. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I don't like this new version of you. I'm not a new version of me. I'm just a version of me. With boundaries. Same thing. After I hung up, I felt something I'd never experienced after a conversation with Patricia. Peace, no guilt, no anxiety, no urge to reconsider and call her back, just calm certainty that I'd made the right choice. Tyler found me in the kitchen, making dinner and humming. "You look happy." "I feel happy. I just turned down a washing machine emergency. How does it feel?" "Like I'm finally learning to live my own life." That weekend, we went apartment hunting in earnest. Our current place was fine, but it was small and didn't have much storage. More importantly, Patricia knew exactly where it was, and had recently demonstrated her willingness to enter it without permission. We found a perfect two-bedroom place in a different neighborhood, with a doorman and more secure building access. The rent was higher, but we could afford it, and the psychological benefits of living somewhere Patricia couldn't access seemed worth the extra cost. As we signed the lease, I realized I was making the first major life decision in years that wasn't influenced by my family's opinions or needs. It felt revolutionary. The moving process took 2 weeks, during which Patricia called daily with increasingly creative emergencies. The garbage disposal was acting up, the smoke detector was beeping, the neighbor's tree was dropping leaves on their lawn. Each crisis was urgent enough to require my immediate attention, but somehow resolved itself when I declined to help. On our last day in the old apartment, Patricia showed up unannounced. "I brought you some moving boxes," she said, holding a small stack of flattened cardboard. "Thanks, but we already have boxes. I also wanted to see if you needed help packing." Tyler appeared in the doorway behind me. "We're all set, but thank you for the offer." Patricia's smile was tight. "I was hoping to talk to Chloe alone for a few minutes. Anything you want to say to me can be said in front of Tyler. It's a mother-daughter conversation. Tyler's my husband. We don't have secrets." Patricia looked between us like we were speaking a foreign language. "Marriage doesn't mean you stop being my daughter." "You're right, but it does mean my primary loyalty is to my marriage now." "Primary loyalty?" She repeated the phrase like it tasted bitter. "I raised you for 26 years, and now your primary loyalty is to someone you've known for 2 years. Mom, that's how marriage works. Maybe that's how Tyler's marriage works. But in our family, we've always put family first." Tyler stepped forward. "Patricia, in healthy families, adult children are encouraged to build their own lives and families. Parents don't compete with spouses for loyalty. I'm not competing with anyone, I'm just pointing out that some relationships are more important than others." "You're absolutely right," I said. "My relationship with Tyler is more important than my relationship with anyone else. That's what marriage means." Patricia's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like resignation mixed with fury. "I see. Well, I suppose I understand my place in your life now. Your place is as my mother who I love, but not as the most important person in my life anymore." She left without saying goodbye, and I watched her drive away from the window of our old apartment. Tyler put his arms around me from behind. "That was hard," he said. "It was necessary. Both things can be true." As we finished packing the last of our belongings, I realized I was closing more than just a chapter in our housing situation. I was closing the chapter of my life where other people's needs automatically took precedence over my own. Where love was measured by availability and sacrifice, rather than respect and support. Our new apartment felt like a fresh start, a place where Tyler and I could build our life together, without constant interruption from people who meant well but didn't understand boundaries. It felt like home in a way that nowhere had felt like home since I'd left for college. For the first time in my adult life, I was excited to see what would happen next. 6 months after we moved to our new apartment, Patricia stopped calling altogether. The silence was so abrupt and complete that I initially worried something had happened to her. For 26 years, she'd been a constant presence in my life, calling multiple times a week with questions, emergencies, and updates on family drama. Then one day in November, the calls just stopped. I reached out to Robert to make sure everything was okay, and he assured me both he and Patricia were fine. She's adjusting to the new dynamic, he said diplomatically. Give her some time, but as weeks turned into months, I began to understand that the silence wasn't temporary. It was Patricia's final strategy for regaining control. If guilt and manipulation hadn't worked, if emergencies and boundary violations hadn't worked, maybe complete withdrawal would demonstrate how much I needed her in my life. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Without the constant stream of family crises and demands for my attention, Tyler and I fell into a rhythm that felt natural and sustainable. We cooked dinner together most nights, talking about our days without interruption from emergency phone call. We made weekend plans that we could actually keep. We started hosting game nights with friends, something I'd never been able to do consistently when family obligations took precedence. Most surprisingly, I discovered interests and hobbies I'd forgotten. In college, I'd loved photography, but I'd given it up when Patricia began calling me multiple times a week for various projects and problems. Now, with my evenings and weekends free, I bought a new camera and started exploring Portland's neighborhoods, capturing the city's street art and architecture. Tyler supported my rediscovered passion enthusiastically, often joining me on photo walks through different districts. We'd spend hours wandering through the Pearl District, or the Alberta Arts District, talking about composition and light while I practiced framing shots. It felt like discovering a part of myself I'd lost years ago. You're different, Tyler told me one evening as we reviewed photos on my laptop. We were sitting on our couch, sharing a bottle of wine and sorting through images from a day trip to the Columbia River Gorge. Different? How? Lighter. More yourself. I didn't realize how much energy you were spending on family drama until you stopped spending energy on family drama. He was right. I felt like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for years and had finally been allowed to set it down. The constant low-level anxiety about potential family emergencies was gone. The guilt about not being available enough, helpful enough, grateful enough had evaporated. In its place was a sense of peace I'd never experienced as an adult, but the peace was interrupted in March by a phone call from Vanessa. Mom's in the hospital, she said without preamble. Heart attack. Dad asked me to call you. The words hit me like cold water. Whatever boundaries I'd established, whatever anger I felt about Patricia's manipulation, she was still my mother. The thought of losing her before we'd found a way to have a healthy relationship felt devastating. How bad is it? Pretty. She's stable now, but she was in intensive care for 3 days. Dad's been beside himself. When did this happen? A week ago. A week ago, and you're just calling me now? Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Dad wanted to call you immediately, but Mom made him promise not to. She said if you cared about the family, you'd check in on your own. The manipulation was breathtaking even from a hospital bed. Patricia had suffered a major medical event and used it as a test of my loyalty, instructing Robert not to inform me so she could later claim I hadn't cared enough to be there for her. Is she okay now? She's going to be fine, but she needs to make some lifestyle changes. Less stress, better diet, more exercise. The doctor said family support would be important for her recovery. I'll be there this afternoon. Good. And Chloe, whatever's been going on between you two, maybe this is a chance to fix it. Tyler drove me to the hospital, understanding without being told that this was different from the manufactured emergencies we'd been ignoring. A heart attack was real, serious, and deserved my presence regardless of our complicated relationship. But when we arrived at Patricia's room, I was surprised to find her sitting up in bed, looking remarkably well for someone who'd supposedly been near death a week earlier. Her hair was styled, her makeup was carefully applied, and she was chatting animatedly with a nurse about the hospital's meal service. Chloe, she exclaimed when she saw me, as if my arrival was a delightful surprise rather than the result of careful orchestration. What a wonderful surprise. I wasn't sure you'd heard about my little health scare. Your heart attack wasn't exactly little, Mom. Well, that's what the doctors are calling it, but I think they're being overly dramatic. I just had some chest pain and shortness of breath, probably stress-related. Tyler and I exchanged glances. Patricia was downplaying a heart attack while simultaneously using it to demonstrate how much stress she'd been under since I'd established boundaries. Robert appeared in the doorway, looking genuinely relieved to see me. Chloe, Thank God. I've been so worried. How is she really? Dad? Better now. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery if she follows their recommendations. Which recommendations? Diet changes, exercise, stress management, the usual heart-healthy lifestyle modifications, and medication? Yes, she'll be on blood thinners and cholesterol medication long-term. Patricia interrupted our conversation with a dramatic sigh. Everyone's making such a fuss. I'm fine. A little tired maybe, but fine. Mom, you had a heart attack. That's not fine. It was a very minor heart attack. Barely even counts. Her need to minimize the seriousness of her condition while simultaneously using it to regain my attention was so typically Patricia that I almost laughed. Even a genuine medical emergency became a tool for manipulation. Over the next few days, as Patricia recovered and prepared to go home, the pattern became clear. She'd complain about feeling weak and overwhelmed whenever Robert or the medical staff was around, but perk up significantly when visitors arrived. She'd mention her stress levels and how worried she'd been about family relationships, making sure everyone understood that her heart attack was at least partially the result of the emotional turmoil I'd caused. The doctor says stress is a major risk factor for heart disease, she told Tyler during one of our visits. Family conflict can be particularly harmful. Family conflict can definitely be stressful. Tyler agreed. That's why healthy boundaries are so important for everyone's well-being. Patricia's smile tightened. I suppose different families handle stress differently. They do. Some families create stress by not respecting boundaries. Others reduce stress by communicating clearly and respecting each other's autonomy. I watched Patricia process Tyler's words, looking for an angle of attack that wouldn't make her seem unreasonable in front of the medical staff. She seemed to realize that arguing about family dynamics while recovering from a stress-related heart attack would undermine her position. When Patricia was discharged from the hospital, Robert asked if Tyler and I could help get her settled at home. I agreed, partly out of genuine concern and partly because I wanted to assess the situation for myself. Their house looked different than I remembered. The projects I'd refused to complete were still undone. The guest bathroom I'd been asked to deep clean was still grimy. The garage I'd been supposed to organize was still chaotic, evidence that life had continued without my unpaid labor, and the world hadn't ended. I've been meaning to hire someone to help with these projects, Patricia said, following my gaze. But finding reliable help is so difficult. There are lots of good cleaning services in Portland, I offered. I can give you some recommendations. Oh, I couldn't have strangers in my house. You never know who you can trust, but she could trust me to work for free, I thought. The double standard was glaring. As we helped Patricia get comfortable in her living room, she began outlining her recovery plan. The doctor says I need to avoid stress, so I'll probably need more help around the house, just until I'm feeling stronger. What kind of help? I asked carefully. Nothing major. Light housework, meal preparation, maybe some organization project. Vanessa's too far away, and your father has his own health issues. Tyler stepped closer to me, a subtle show of support. Patricia, there are lots of professional services that can help with those tasks. Home health aides, cleaning services, meal delivery program. Those things are so expensive and impersonal. Family support is much more meaningful. Family support is important, I agreed, but it needs to be sustainable and voluntary. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. I would hope my daughter would volunteer to help her mother recover from a heart attack. I'm happy to help with specific tasks occasionally, but I'm not available to be your regular household help. I see. So my heart attack hasn't changed your priority. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Patricia was suggesting that if I truly cared about her health and recovery, I would resume my old role as unpaid family assistant. My refusal to do so was evidence of my selfishness and lack of love. My priority is your health and recovery, I said, which is why I think you should work with professionals who can provide consistent, reliable support. Professionals don't love you. No, they don't. But they also don't manipulate you or make you feel guilty for having boundaries. Patricia's face flushed and I immediately regretted the comment. She was recovering from a major medical event, and attacking her methods of manipulation wasn't helpful for anyone. I think I need to rest, she said coldly. Robert walked us to the door, his expression apologetic. "Thank you for helping today. I know this is complicated. How are you holding up, Dad?" "I'm managing." The heart attack scared me more than I want to admit, made me realize how much I take for granted, including Mom's manipulation of family relationships. Robert was quiet for a moment. "Your mother has always been intense about family loyalty. It's gotten worse since you got married, but it's not new. Why haven't you ever said anything?" "Because I love her, and I've learned to work around her difficult quality." "But Chloe, you don't have to live the way I've chosen to live. You have the right to build your own life with your own priorities." His words were a gift I hadn't expected. Robert's validation of my choices, coming from someone who'd lived with Patricia's manipulation for 30 years, felt more valuable than any apology she might offer. Over the following weeks, I maintained regular contact with both parents, checking on Patricia's recovery and offering specific help when needed. I drove her to 2 medical appointments when Robert wasn't available. I picked up groceries when she wasn't feeling well enough to shop. I provided the kind of support that felt reasonable and sustainable, but I didn't resume my old role as general household problem solver. When Patricia mentioned that the guest bathroom still needed deep cleaning, I offered to recommend a good cleaning service. When she complained about the disorganized garage, I suggested she hire a professional organizer. When she hinted that meal preparation was exhausting, I provided information about meal delivery service. Each time, she responded with hurt disappointment, as if my refusal to provide free labor was evidence that I didn't care about her recovery. But each time I held my boundary, offering alternative solutions instead of giving in to guilt. The dynamic shifted gradually over several months. Patricia stopped asking me directly for household help, and began making pointed comments about how difficult it was to manage everything herself. I stopped feeling guilty about not volunteering for projects, and started feeling proud of maintaining healthy boundaries. By summer, we'd settled into a new normal. I called Patricia once a week to check on her health. Tyler and I had dinner with my parents once a month. I helped with genuine emergencies when they arose, but I no longer dropped everything for manufactured crises. The relationship wasn't perfect, but it was sustainable. Patricia still occasionally tested my boundaries, but she'd learned that I wouldn't cave to guilt or manipulation. Robert had become more vocal about supporting my independence, which helped balance Patricia's attempts to regain control. Most importantly, my marriage had flourished. Tyler and I had grown closer through the process of establishing boundaries with my family. We'd learned to communicate more effectively, to support each other through difficult situations, and to prioritize our relationship over external pressure. One evening in August, almost a year after Patricia's heart attack, Tyler and I were sitting on our apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset over the city skyline. We'd just finished editing photos from a weekend trip to the Oregon coast, and my camera was sitting on the table between us. "Do you miss it?" Tyler asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The drama, the constant emergencies, being needed so intensely." I considered the question serious. There had been something addictive about being the family's go-to problem solver, the daughter who could handle any crisis. It had given me a sense of purpose and importance, even when it exhausted me. Sometimes, I admit, not the manipulation or the guilt, but the feeling of being indispensable. "You're indispensable to me." "That's different. You value my independence." My family valued my availability, and now I value my independence too. As we watched the sun disappear behind the western hills, I realized that the girl who had cut her honeymoon short to clean her parents' house felt like a stranger to me now. That version of myself had been so focused on managing other people's emotions that she'd forgotten to pay attention to her own. The woman I'd become was still generous, still caring, still willing to help family when genuinely needed, but she was also protective of her own time, energy, and emotional well-being. She understood that love didn't require the sacrifice of selfhood, and that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect rather than one-sided availability. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Thinking of you tonight. Hope you're happy." It was a simple message, but it represented a significant shift. No emergency, no request for help, no guilt about insufficient attention, just a mother thinking of her daughter. I texted back, "Very happy. Hope you're feeling well." love you, and I meant it. I did love her, just not in the way she'd trained me to love her. I loved her without sacrificing myself. I loved her while maintaining boundaries. I loved her as an adult daughter, not as an extension of her will. Tyler reached over and took my hand. What are you thinking about? How different everything is now. Better, much better. As we headed inside to start dinner, I caught my reflection in the sliding glass door. The woman looking back at me looked confident, peaceful, content. She looked like someone who had learned to put herself first when necessary, and who had discovered that self-respect was not selfish but essential. She looked like someone who had finally grown up. The locks on our apartment door were still the ones Patricia had chosen, but now they kept out the chaos and manipulation that had once defined my life. Inside our home, Tyler and I had built something that was truly ours, a relationship based on mutual support, honest communication, and the radical idea that love should make you feel more yourself, not less. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight for the right to live your own life. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is the example of someone who refuses to be diminished by their demand. And sometimes, when you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you discover that being yourself is more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.